Welcome to this month's installment of the North Star Podcast. We take back up our discussion of the sacred from the last episode, beginning by looking at the idea of the holy other. We look at the concept of cosmos and at the idea of nature. What is holy other? What is the sacred with regard to the cosmos? This leads us to explore the manifestation of the sacred in nature and to hazard a definition of the sacred as the expansiveness or beauty we find in nature. This seems incomplete, so we continue to explore the sacred both in nature and human production. Meaning here becomes central, and we look at sacred time and space and the ways the sacred and profane intermingle. Ultimately, it seems we agree that in an important way, the sacred illumines the profane, providing meaning beyond itself. Where are we at?
We were talking about the stone remaining a stone and remaining itself as sacred, and the idea of being in the cosmos and being at one with your surroundings. And it contrasts and it creates a paradox with the idea of the wholly other, the completely other. And I think it's at this point where I started to, I think, Garrett, you and I would maybe agree where, it is wholly other, but you are at once at one with it. I think we should continue from this point.
Right. Well, and even, so I've been thinking over the last few minutes about this idea of cosmos and its relationship to us, to thinking, to the gods, all that stuff. There is a way of thinking that some people have that says that, the order of the cosmos is sort of a pre-existing thing, and that one way of dealing with it is to try to harmonize with it, and another way is to isolate yourself from it to become better than it in some way. And some of these people would say that's the Wodenic way of being. That, for instance, our creation myth, right, where there's an order that comes out of Ginunga Gap, whatever, right, and it creates giants and stuff, and then there's this guy with two brothers who comes out of it and says, "Yeah, no, not like that." Destroys that order and creates a new one. And that's so I realize that I'm going into details long before I should go into details. But the point, I guess, is that there's a sense that there's a cosmos and order, and then there's someone that comes out of it that says, that's not the way it needs to be. That's not the way I want it to be. And then wrecks the whole damn thing and makes a new order, right?
Yeah, or there's some kind of, I guess, put in another, I don't know, more abstract terminology, that there is a organizing force that, I don't know, I think of the Big Bang and like kind of just that whole, like, I guess you can call it a cosmology.
Yeah.
An emanation of how events, like a phenomenology of how things happened. But like you have like this random organization of gases and all that stuff, and then there's something that happened that brought it into.
Well, the Big Bang's even weirder than that, right? I had a pretty smart guy one time point out to me how incoherent the whole thing is, and it really is. And another smart guy had a great metaphor for it, where he talked about, you've got nothing, not even nothing, except for one suspicious package. That's a quote from John Michel, or an attempt at one.
Well, yeah, it kind of reminds me of Heidegger. Like you had nothing, and then there was this something something, or
well,
I don't know. It's just like this weird introduction of like, here you have literally nothing.
I mean, Heidegger isn't talking about it in that way.
I know
though.
he's not,
talking
but
about,
like it's kind of that same kind of cluster of ideas, I guess.
Yeah, it's a similar cluster of ideas, but I think you got something completely different if you get into Heidegger, because he's not talking about the way things came into being or something. He's just talking about what being is.
No.
With the Big Bang and the way that it's, people say this is our answer to how things started, but it's not much of an answer. It's basically just saying things started all in one place at one time, and boy, you try to figure out how that makes any sense, and it gets pretty dang weird.
So it's the same thing as a myth. Yeah. I mean, like it makes like when you explain it, it sounds the same as a myth of like any creation story.
I mean, it does start from observation. Certainly there is a very clear observation that things are moving away from each other in the universe. There's that microwave background radiation thing. There's a lot of evidence for the story as they tell it, but it doesn't explain as much, I think, as people want it to.
It gets so abstract at a certain point that it basically becomes myth itself. Like, I mean, it's explained in very concrete terms where you could even probably explain the gases that were present that made this expansion. But at the end of the day, like, it's this weird...
Well, to begin with, it wasn't even gases. It was a singularity. It's just a point, and it just boom. and
but then that expanded to be all the matter that is known today.
Right. We start with a bunch of hydrogen, and things come together, and yeah, it's all. So let's not get lost in that, though.
Well, but that's even an epicenter which everything expanded from, which I think is its own idea of the sacred, which you know, like that there's a sacred, very small center where everything began and everything expanded from that. So I think there's a little bit of
But we all know that the center is really the omphalos at the Temple of Delphi, right?
That's apparently where everything begins from. Yes.
or some other omphalos somewhere else, or the pillar in the center of some guy's village.
I think it's more describing like
Erisberg, I think.
Yep.
So to get back to this idea though of, you have an original order that some gods come along and upset in order to create a new order.
Yeah.
Look at it in terms of the myth. Those gods don't come from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Right. They come about differently somehow, though.
Differently, but from the same place.
Right.
So it's not as though the principle that reorders the existing order into a new order is wholly other. Mm-hmm. It's not coming from outside of that cosmos as it was. It's a part of it, and therefore maybe, possibly, could be considered to be implicit from the beginning.
Yeah, or it could be considered to be I mean, if you can think about it as a kind of like, I'm trying not to use scientific metaphors because I think that gets us in the wrong direction.
Right.
But you can look at it as there's still a sense in which it's a rebellion against order, right? Mm-hmm. There's an order, and then something comes up and says, no, this has to be completely different, and changes it. Now, does that mean the wholly other like he's talking about? I don't think it does. And I think this is what he, being Rudolf Otto, that wholly other, it's not, he even says, anti-cosmic, right? The numinous is anti-cosmic, or?
No, I think that it's just beyond cosmic.
Let's see it. We will search through our papers.
Nothing like human or cosmic.
Yeah, so nothing like cosmic. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, the problem there is that whatever the numinous is, we tend to associate it with the creation of the cosmos, right? When we start talking about things being divine, we usually mean either sort of minor divinities, right? So if we're talking about like, the divinities people find in the forest, or like tree spirits or something, right? Okay, they're not really cosmic, but they're definitely not from outside the cosmos. They're something that arises as part of the cosmos in the forest. If we're talking about like the divinities who are responsible for the creation of the cosmos, certainly our Germanic myth shows them as arising out of, let's call it a pre-existing cosmos. There was an order that was not very pretty, really, giants,
in order, yeah.
Giants reproducing themselves between their legs and stuff. It was a weird place. I don't think I'd want to visit.
Armpit
too. Yes. Yeah. Which one do you want to be? The one from the thighs or the one from the armpit?
They're both unpleasant.
Yeah. Neither one of them seems optimal. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think that, I think what we have here perhaps is an idea of not like ultimate conception, but like relative conception, where like things began, like it's like cycles of time. Like things didn't begin at this time, but they began at a time that we can't really tell. And that time still exists after the fact that it began, like at whatever time that it began, like because time didn't exist. One time began because it just began then. So,
yep. Well, and that's an old argument, right?
Yeah.
About time. That was how Augustine tried to defend his religion against those bad pagans who thought the universe had always existed. Because, what's this idea about God creating the universe? What was he doing before that if he's eternal? I mean, was he just, sitting around? Why did he pick that time to do it? And Augustine says, well, time only comes from movement. He's getting that. I think that's Augustine. Yeah, he's getting that from Aristotle or something. Might be Aquinas. I'm sorry I'm not the best Christian theologian out there. I do what I can. All right. If you're a better Christian theologian than me and wish to join our podcast, look at the description, and there's probably an email there. So his claim was before there was movement or any kind of change, there was no time. So before the universe was created, there was no time. So it's not that he waited some eternal period of time and then made the thing. It's just that there was no time. And that's supposed to be an explanation. And that's at least as incoherent as the whole Big Bang thing, where before the Big Bang, there was no time, there was nothing, not even nothing, just the suspicious package. It always gets weird. And maybe it should, right? We're dealing with the beginning of all things. The beginning of all things is going to be frickin' hard to understand because we are things trying to understand how it all started. We do have our limits, maybe. But I guess back to the story, wholly other and nothing cosmic. So our gods, if we take the idea that, so first of all, this idea, this word we're using, cosmos, comes from Greek, means order or arrangement or something like that. We tend to think of it as meaning the universe. Thank you, Carl Sagan. But what we really mean is, what the word really means is the order that everything is in. So Odin and his brothers, according to the story given to us in Snorri Sturluson, exist in a place that has some kind of order to it. And they rearrange that order, creating, let's say, a new order, a new cosmos. So since they came from outside of that new cosmos, they came from before it, they came from something that existed before it that was not the same, maybe in that sense, they are unlike the cosmos. They are outside the cosmos. And maybe in that sense, they are wholly other. Even if that's the case, it seems that many of our numinous experiences, including those, frightening ones, the wholly other ones, come from things that exist in the cosmos and have their origin in the cosmos. So I maybe we're belaboring this too much, but it seems to me that aspect of what it means to be wholly other is maybe going too far. It is maybe just sort of an artifact in his thinking of his Christianity.
Rudolf Otto's, yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think that it brings us pretty tidily to a more zoomed in version of the cosmos, which Eliade, to your point, contextualize a little bit deeper as nature. And Eliade talks at length about nature and argues that nature is really fraught with religious values, and hence that nature is never only natural. This sacrality is not simply based on the divine communication that has designated it or consecrated it as sacred, but within nature are manifestations of the different modalities of the sacred, of the very structure of the world, a la cosmic order, of the different modalities of the sacred in the very structure of the world and cosmic phenomena. So to bring cosmos a little bit down to a more earthly structure of nature, it's kind of the same micro macro, like it's the same amount of order, just writ small in earth. So like we can, when we go out into the mountains, and Eliade talks about this at length, when we go out into the mountains or when we encounter a river, it at once means just the river itself, but also something more than that.
So what's nature mean?
Nature meaning I would say the earth, really, like the natural earth.
Nature is a fraught concept too.
It is.
Right? And again, if we want to, go back, we can talk about like Greek thinkers who use this term physis, which is often translated as nature, and it got translated into Latin as natura or whatever. Yep. And certain interpreters would say that it was really a much wider concept than natura, and is certainly a wider concept than what we say is nature, but was pretty much like what is or being or something. Although it comes from a root word that has to do with things that grow, right? Fuo, to grow.
But a root that is actually related to the word to be, and also Germanic words meaning to dwell, like what Old Saxon buan, or even meaning to farm, or German bauen, which means to build.
Right. Right. And so there's a lot going on there, I guess, is my point. And we have to be careful about clarifying the unclear with the further unclear. Although I suspect that we're going to do a lot of that.
And I think that part of it, to get back to the top of the episode, is you can view nature in two modes. Right. Like I think Eliade would agree that you can view it in the sacred, where it's like this divine order, like it's a whole ecosystem, like where the plants do the photosynthesizing and the recycling of energy, and like the predators will kill off too much prey that will eat the vegetation, and like this whole working organism.
It's a system.
Yeah. So you can view it in that way, or you could just walk through the forest and see a plant with really, like you can see the mundane, kind of mindless, more surface level.
Right. There's again, Heidegger.
It operates on two modalities.
Heidegger talks about this distinction too, where you can view the forest as a forest, and you can view the forest as so much timber.
Yeah.
Right.
You can reduce nature to something to be exploited. And that's obviously not the nature that we are seeing.
But I think the connection between the two is the expansiveness of it. And I think that's really what the Profane is getting at, is the expansiveness and the inexhaustible meaning or beauty that you can encounter when you...
The Profane is getting at that? Or
no, the sacred. Yeah. Like the sacred is when you encounter it, you are completely immersed in the inexhaustible meaning or the unending beauty of a thing.
And I think that's a good place to bring up the connection between the concept of the sacred and the concept of meaning in Eliade, right? These things are, for Eliade, they share the same meaning, the same definition. You could define the sacred as absolute meaning, right? You could define it also as absolute being. all of these things for Eliade are the same thing. So when you're talking about an experience of the meaning of an event or the meaning of an object or time or place, that is the same thing as talking about its sacrality. And where do I want to go with that? I think that shows us, especially people who might be coming from a more secular worldview or who are more familiar with that, kind of an inroad into thinking about the sacred as being that source from which meaning flows, right? Or just the sacred as concentrations of meaning in general. So that, to give an example, right? Let's say your grandma had a spoon collection, right? And to anyone else, those are just spoons. To you, those bring up associations with, your family, memories of your childhood, right? So they have a heightened sense of being to you because they have a heightened sense of meaning to you. We might not go so far as to say that they're sacred in, normal, everyday, secular sorts of
personalized way
thinking.
They're sacred, though, for sure. Yeah.
And I would say, for people who are interested in doing things like ancestor worship, which I would say is definitely part of what we do, yeah, you could absolutely consider those to be sacred. To that person, in a minor sense, not necessarily the same thing as the sort of sacrality that an image of a god might have, right? Which is bigger in some sense, but still there is a relationship there. You could say that you're walking, and I've had this experience too. You're walking through a neighborhood and you see a particular tree, and all of a sudden the confluence of the time of day, what's going on in your head, what's going on in your life, and that tree being there strike you with a perhaps not entirely definable sense. Oh, this means something, right? In the same sort of way, from that one movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when the guy is making Devil's Tower out of mashed potatoes, this means something, right? That sense that there is meaning here when you encounter things out in the world. And it's especially, I think, when you encounter things in what we're calling the natural world, that is a sense of the sacred. Why is it more important to encounter these things in the natural world? I think because you're encountering things that have not been shaped by a human mind.
Yeah.
And seeing something that has meaning to you that is coming from outside of the world of human production, which is really difficult to get away from these days.
Yeah, that would neatly tie the idea of the sacred to the natural, and the idea of the profane to like the, inventions that we make to make life more efficient and stuff like that.
And certainly
those are valuable,
right.
like we said at the top of the episode.
Valuable. And I think also it's important to state that there are things that are of human production that are at the same time sacred. I think that if you want to bring in this idea of the holy other, you need to bring down what is not other to a smaller scale. If you're talking about the holy other as being that which is simply outside of kind of the circle of daily human life, that's not how Otto means it. I don't think that's how Eliade means it either. But you can still say that it's an eruption from outside because you are, as it were, catching a signal from outside of the daily, catching a signal from outside of the bounded circuit of human affairs, and seeing, oh, this also has meaning, right? Almost like a communication from outside of those circles where you would expect it. It's not like the tree is actually saying, hey, Nick, how's it going? Right? But you have a sense that there is some sort of meaning there. There's some sort of information there.
Yeah. And I think this brings us to Eliade officially. And the idea of being and homo religiosus. And I wanted to start by talking about how Eliade really starts off his book in The Sacred of the Profane as this kind of intermixing of the three ideas of power, being, and reality. It's all kind of tied up in to one concept. So, quote, "The man of archaic societies tends to live as much as possible in the sacred or in as close proximity to consecrated objects. The tendency is perfectly understandable because, for primitives, as the man of all pre-modern societies, the sacred is equivalent to power, and in the last analysis, to reality. The sacred is saturated with being. Sacred power means reality, and at the same time, enduringness and efficacy." Now, let me know if you want me to repeat that quote, because it's an important one that I want to expand upon. Really, the idea is being power, reality, and being here.
Which are sort of the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, and but also enhance each other somehow. They all kind of have to do with each other. It's not all just you can't say they're all the same thing. They all are kind of working together somehow, which is why I wanted to stop here.
So I think that especially at the end there, where you're saying sacred power means reality and at the same time enduringness and efficacy, you're also opening the door for, just a riff off of the last point I was making, you're opening the door for things of human make also to fall into that, right?
Right.
I think that, man, there are places that I want to go with that, but I'm not sure how to make the bridge. Here's an example, right? I was actually just rereading the first couple of chapters of The Sacred and the Profane, and he talks about, here, we open up to the passage. He's talking about a particular tribe of Aborigines in Australia called the Achilpa. And they had a particular divine being in their mythology named Numbakula, who founded all of their institutions and then ended up making a pole out of a gum tree, consecrating it with blood, and then climbing that pole into heaven and disappearing. So the important thing to remember here is that the Achilpa are nomadic, right? So it's not that they plant this pole and then they leave it. They plant it and they take it with them wherever they go, and they plant it, wherever they happen to settle for the night, right? And they address their prayers to it, etc. So it's very important that in Achilpa culture that they're taking it with them, so that they're always living in proximity to what is very literally an expression of vertical space for them, right? Their God went up this pole to heaven, and this is how they continue to communicate with that God. So not only verticality, but also kind of an opening or a pathway of communication with the divine. So he mentions that at one point, the pole breaks, right? And it's like the end of the world. It's a reversion to chaos, specifically because they no longer have this pathway of open communication to the divine. They no longer have a representation of the verticality, the relationship between earth and heaven. And they wander around aimlessly for a while, and they lay down to die. And I think Eliade says, very importantly, it's because that kind of a life for pre-modern human beings is impossible. A life without proximity to the sacred, a life without a clear communication with the divine is impossible. So another part of our pre-recording conversation had to do with the fact that even in cultures, and we've alluded to it in the recording today, even in cultures where the sacred as such is demoted to the same sort of realm of beliefs as like fairy tales, right? There's no such thing as the sacred, etc. There are always ways in which it comes about again, right? Even undercover, even through the workings of the state, or certain particular places where events important to the state occurred will be considered the same kind of sacred center.
So why is that life impossible?
That's a really good question. I think to kind of think as I'm talking here, so maybe this won't be entirely coherent to start with. I think it's because human life, in order for it to be human, has to have a connection with the divine, and it has to exist in some sort of ordering of space and time, what we call a cosmos. Things have to, I think that the human mind or the human spirit requires a kind of order.
So I think to some degree I agree with that. I mean, for the most part. I don't know that it's much of an answer, though.
Yeah, I think that's a better comment on the next point, which is sacred time and space. I think what...
No, but I think it was good here because, yes, I mean, if you lose that connection to the gods, you lose that sense of order and all that. And that is stuff that is certainly inherently human. But at the same time, I mean, we certainly know plenty of people who are nowhere near any pole that it was ever climbed up by any god, right?
Yep.
Or any analogous thing that and yet they seem to be. I mean, no one's fine. We're all a little messed up.
We're all relative varying
they,
degrees of not fine.
They may very well be on benzos or something, but they are not laying down and dying, right?
Right.
So why? I mean, that to me is a question. What is so vastly missing from the loss of that thing that, look, I'm done, right?
I can only begin to answer through mythic imagery, right? The first thing that occurs to me is why is, for instance, you mentioned it before, the center at Delphi called the omphalos, which means navel. It's because there's a sense of an umbilicus being there.
Yeah.
That nourishes us from the divine world. And to delve into it more deeply, I think that we, not to get topical, because that's what we absolutely don't want to do in this podcast, but we can see over the last, not even just a few decades, over the last 10 decades, 20 decades, we can see a progressive breakdown of systems of meaning in at least Western cultures that seems to leave people more and more adrift to the point that they pursue varying degrees of laying down and dying, whether that is the fast way of suicide, or whether that's the slow way of drug addiction, or killing off of the sense of the numinous through various other addictions or various other practices. And I don't mean to sound like your average Republican conservative here, but I think, especially I don't mean to sound like your average Catholic religious conservative, but I think that there's a certain way in which the sorts of distractions that people pursue in the modern world are a result of them wanting to kill off this sensation of being disconnected. And why we need the connection to the divine, I can't at this point quite
So
put
how does
into
this
words.
How does this, to tie back?
Yeah.
How does this have to do with power, reality, and being? Because I feel like you wanted to start off, but I feel like we might need to tie it back.
Well, if if we throw in a few suppositions here, right? If we assume the divine world is the source of reality, being, and power, which I think certainly Eliade would, if you have your conduit to that world broken off, well, they're missing, right? They're gone.
So you're living in a world that no longer has a secure basis. You're living in a world that no longer has reality and enduringness and efficacy in the same way.
Right. And so then you're just feeling lost and everything feels unreal, right?
Yeah.
Which Eliade talks about.
And the feeling of unreality is something that has been commented by many people about, the contemporary world, right?
Sure.
Everything is just sort of a copy of something else. Everything is, so that's something that we seem to have, and some people just accept it, but accepting it is not sort of the normal way that people have been, right? People are frightened to live in a world where, well, let's just say it, where meaning is lost, right?
Yeah, I see where the idea is shaping up. So modernity basically, and I think we can all see this, is that modernity is resorted to for mostly capitalistic purposes to reduce itself to repeating the same stories over and over again, and just because it makes money, and there's no real nuance now.
And I don't think
you guys are kind of
think it's right to just reduce that to the workings of capitalism. Capitalism plays a part in kind of the continuing erosion of systems of meaning, but there's something else at work there beneath capitalism.
Mm.
Well, I think you can see the same. You can see communism, fascism, whatever the heck else people have believed over the last couple centuries to almost all be reactions to this loss of meaning, right? Maybe Christianity was at one time too, going way back. These movements that attempt to recast values one way or another are reactions to values not to meaning not being apparent, I think.
Yeah. I think that it certainly at least represents like a rebirth, death cycle of ideas in general. I think that we've all understood ideas as being kind of cyclical, and they have their lifespan, and eventually, even with fashion trends and stuff like that, we'd recognize that things will die away and come back. And I think that it kind of represents the same kind of life cycle of ideas in a way. Certain ideas will go away and come back, and in different ways, necessarily not in their most truest original idea.
Let's delve into that for a second, right? Because we could say that cycles of growth, decline, death, and rebirth are a part of the sacred, but we can also see them outside of the sacred as well, right? I think that what we are experiencing is rapid and increasingly more rapid life cycles of arising and falling away of systems of meaning. Almost as though, this one will do for now, but it's almost like you have a disposable religion or you have a disposable ideology. This one will do for now. It'll scratch the itch of an underlying system of failure of meaning in the world, and then we'll throw it away and another one will come along. And I think that something that is unique in the modern world is that systems of meaning themselves become subject to rise and fall. They become subject to trends and fashions.
Yeah, I think that's certainly that is the case, that they're subject to that now. I mean, I have some question about the idea that these ideas are cyclical. I can see cycles like in the last maybe 100, 200 years. I don't know that any of the dominant ideologies of today are really reflected by anything that was happening in 1350, though,
Right.
I think that we have to be careful about seeing them as too cyclical or too obviously cyclical. But there's something going on here, though, in that there certainly is an attempt to replace something that's missing with a lot of these. And it seems that after a relatively recent history of those attempts mostly failing, we are indeed now where people are sort of doing it with an as-if attitude, right?
Right.
I don't think that, today's internet communist or internet fascist believes in it the same way that, the people fighting each other in the Spanish Civil War did. The fascists and communists on opposite sides.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the same thing. We are definitely moving far away, I think, from where we were intending to go.
But I think we can salvage it. So we were talking about power, reality, and being, and time, enduringness, and efficacy. And I think that can kind of tie into sacred time. So if we're talking about power, reality, and being, the idea that these cycles exist, I think kind of bring us almost to a profane time. So like you can view cycles in the profane lens,
yes,
right? Like you eat, sleep, shit. Like
hopefully you wake up.
You could look at life in that cycle, right? So like life follows cycles too. So I think where this leads us is that the sacred time and sacred space can enhance the profane. And I want to read some summary of what Eliade's thoughts are that I wrote. Eliade emphasizes that the sacred often disrupts the linear flow of time in ordinary space. Sacred time is marked by events or rituals that reenact mythical narratives, connecting individuals to a timeless mythic past. Sacred space can be a location where the divine is believed to be more accessible, such as a temple, shrine, or sacred mountain, which we're talking about how, like these things kind of just assimilate themselves. But like also, like, I mean, like we were talking about earlier, any time space that you have had meaning assigned to it can kind of assign itself as sacred. So I think that we are kind of like approaching this synthesis of a paradox, like of sacred and profane, that is elusive in this ideas. Then I think even Eliade and Otto kind of have a hard time expressing is like the interminglingness between the sacred and the profane, kind of, and how the sacred can influence the profane.
And I think that the only thing paradoxical there is not the relationship between the sacred and the profane, but their conjunction in human life. So it's a paradox in that case that everyone who's ever practiced a religion is familiar with intimately, but still it's kind of hard to put into words, right? The fact is, and I think we said it before, the sacred is necessary for human life, coming from a religious viewpoint. Let's just get that out of the way to start with. The sacred is necessary for human life, but humans can't live there all the time.
Yep.
There has to be an oscillation, an ebb and flow. This is why the sacred and the profane mingle in human life, because on the one hand, if you live entirely in profane time, then your world lacks meaning, efficacy, being, power, right? If you exist all the time in sacred time, then, well, the things that you have to do because of your nature as a human being that are not part of the sacred, you can't do those there.
So I have a question there, though. If we can't, so we had talked earlier about a bifurcation of, we're calling it the sacred, but really we're talking about between, the sacred and the sanctus or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it both of them that we're incapable of living in all the time? I feel that the one that in Germanic corresponds to Heilige maybe you can't live in it all the time. It's clear the other one
I think
can,
the only one
right?
that you can't live in all the time is the sacred.
The weak.
Yeah, the
Right.
weak. Right.
I think, or via, if we're going to use German.
Via.
Geweihtheit. But I think, yes, I think that you can spend more of your time, and I think that the goal for a religious person is to spend most of their time in Heiligkeit, right?
Right.
But when you got to go take a shit, you don't do that in a temple. You don't do that in front of your sacred fire. Yeah.
I'm sorry. My shits are sacred. I don't understand what you were talking about.
And again, there's deeper nuances here that we can delve into, because even something that we might consider sacred, sleeping with your wife, for instance, there are clear traditions that you don't do that in front of the home altar. You don't do that where you worship your ancestors, right? Things like that.
So, I mean, in that case, ancestors. I don't want my grandparents watching me do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
not.
I'm cool with
Don't
that.
have your
not even when
No.
they were alive. Certainly not now when they're not.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think that, this is probably good fodder or grist for the mill later on when we try and talk about the topography and the kind of internal geography of the sacred. But I think that the human condition is just such that we're not, in our biological being, or even necessarily in our mental being, always 100% compatible with the sacred. We try and spend as much time there as possible because that gives our life meaning and strength and efficacy.
Yep.
And sometimes we have to venture into, or at least receive something from, those parts of the sacred that are more antithetical to human existence, because that is a source of power. Right. I've even heard people say that the distinction between Saket and Sanctus, or the distinction between weak and Heilig, is that the power of that separateness, that separate kind of sacrality, is transformed into something that you can actually live with, and that's the Heilig. Right, or the Heil, you might say, if you're gonna go after E.H. Green and his concept of this kind of almost substance that you gain from the gods. I think that there are still some times where you need to go take care of things outside of the sacred enclosure. And this brings us back to, again, we can look at the Greek idea of miasma, which is not considered, again, to go back to our original idea of, what is the profane. The profane isn't something that's evil. Miasma isn't evil either, but you do need to wash it off in order to interact with the sacred, in the same way that we have different rituals of cleansing before we interact with the sacred. Why it is that the human can't exist entirely in the sacred, and why it is that the human cannot exist entirely separate from the sacred, I'm not prepared to answer right now.
Is it that maybe that without the sacred mode of being, that cosmos and nature itself would just not make any sense? I mean, that would seem to make sense, because the order in which that we place it in our brain is kind of the sacred.
Yeah, a good point.
Kind of like software, that we're running on. It's just oh, this all makes sense because these organisms eat, like mushrooms eat the dead, and then that feeds the trees, and then the trees feed the deer, and the deer feed the wolves. It kind of creates this whole order.
What it all goes into, I think, is that human beings need structure in order to survive.
Yeah.
And
it's got to start from somewhere, yeah.
Right. And that structure has to come from somewhere. And if you couldn't predict, right, if you woke up today and it was summer, and then you woke up tomorrow and it was winter, and the day after was fall, and the seasons were all out of order. If the migration of the animals that you rely on to live off of was non-predictable, if today you're hunting deer, tomorrow deer are hunting you, that's not the sort of world that human beings can live in. We require a certain degree of replicability and what's the term I'm reaching for here?
Efficacy, enduringness?
Not, well, enduringness certainly, but also predictability, right? Not that existence has to always be predictable, but it's as though there have to be certain things that we can count on. The absence of the sacred therefore implies, to a religious point of view, the absence of anything you can actually count on. The absence of a basis upon which you can found a life.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately sums up kind of what Eliade means by enduringness and efficacy, is that mentation or meaning or significance and the way that it enhances being is it gives it power, it gives it meaning, it gives it reason to do the things that it does, and then it ultimately will enhance it by giving it this kind of external, to tie back to the holy other, holy other reasons to do this thing, which is to be and to try to survive. Because otherwise, I don't know, like there is no intrinsic meaning as to why. I think that's kind of what all religion is trying to do, is like, why should I even do this anymore?
I would object. I would actually say it's not that
why. Yeah, I guess that's maybe
I would say it's not so much as that there's not an intrinsic meaning. It's that we may have a sense that there is a meaning, but it's not something that we can directly know.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that as we talk about religion on this podcast, we're going to run into that a lot, that there is inherent mystery in everything having to do with religion, right? The nature of gods, the questions that Garrett are asking, which I think are important questions, but that aren't necessarily the sorts of things you can arrive at an answer to. And that's a lot of what you're going to find when you're talking about the sacred, as, especially in the sense of meaningfulness, right? Not necessarily a meaningfulness that you can derive an easily replicable and statable meaning from, but a sense of meaningfulness that you might struggle for the rest of your life to express. Because that's the nature of it. It's meaning that's bigger than the human mind can encompass.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the next idea that I wanted to talk about was its impact on mentation and just being itself, and related ideas of mindfulness. And I just talked about how it enhances efficacy and like revitalizes survivalness and being itself, but also adds meaning to it, which I think is the other layer to that. Like it lends itself to a qualitative. We talked a lot pre-recording versus like the quantitative, like we measure time in very quantitative, like seconds and stuff like that, but like a qualitative sense of being, of this is, meaning as to why I'm alive, why existence exists at all. Like, it kind of, the sacred can, wherever you come from in your inquiry, present itself some pretty amazing revelations to you if you're really curious about it. So I wanted to stop and talk about just mindfulness, meditation, and kind of going off being and how it can enhance being through your own inherent instincts to think.
If you could define what you mean by mentation,
Thinking.
just thinking in
Thinking,
general.
yeah. I think of thinking and being as kind of closely related, right? Like, I mean, like it's almost indistinguishable. Like they are different.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the same. Thinking is certainly on top of being.
Well, I used to think the same way. And I think, man, this is going to get kind of recursive, right?
It's going to get existential.
If you're thinking about thinking, whoops, I used to have the idea that who I am is just the thinker of these thoughts, right? And I had a thought about myself, an idea about myself as the thinker, right? The thinking being that is having these thoughts. And I've had experiences. And again, I feel like I'm falling back a lot on saying, well, you know, what you're saying sounds very good, but I have experienced otherwise. That's not how I mean it.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had experiences that showed me that it's not that being and thinking are the same thing, but that thinking somehow springs to life from being. That who I am is not this thinker of thoughts, that is something that comes after, right? The being is primary and difficult to think about.
Well, because, you're trying to think to the a priori idea of being,
Garrett, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't think I can really go into them, to be perfectly honest. The relationship between thinking and being is tough. I think it's good to get away from the Cartesian idea that what you are is the being that thinks.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Res cogitans is not who you are. But I there's a jungle we could get lost in. Yet another jungle.
Yet another. Not that we're not lost in this one. So meaning, right? When we talk about meaning, we're talking about something that presents itself to the mind. When we talk about thinking, we're talking about the activity of the mind. The meaning that presents itself from the sacred gives your mind something to work on, but again, I think that particularly the sorts of meanings, the sorts of occurrences that you think about in that are coming from the sacred are things that you will never be able to get to the bottom of. And that's not because there isn't any actual meaning there. Quite the opposite. It's because there's so much meaning there that you cannot reach the bottom.
Well, that's, I mean, almost anything, maybe anything that's real is inexhaustible in a way, right?
Yeah.
Not just the holy. I mean, just, there is nothing in this room that I can ever be done describing if I wanted to describe it completely.
Yeah.
That's just sort of a sign of reality, is that inexhaustibility. So, of course, we're going to find that inexhaustibility when we're dealing with the holy, right?
Yeah.
It's
and that's really kind of, if I'm understanding the idea right, always available. Yeah. Like you could always choose to be like, oh, everything means, but like my English, my freshman year English professor said this quote that stuck with me, that if everything means everything, then everything essentially means nothing. Mm. So like you can't just have this like space where like, oh, everything is so meaningful. Like you have to have these kind of levels and like these.
Right. But in the inexhaustibility of anything, it's not an overlapping inexhaustibility, right? So, like, if I were to describe my little snuff tin here infinitely, it wouldn't be the same as describing, the Temple of Uppsala infinitely.
No. Yeah, and I think that
So it's almost a matter of a filter, right? And maybe, okay, here's where we make a connection, I think. You guys tell me if I'm full of shit. the distinction between the sacred and the profane as modes of human existence have to do with when you're in a profane mode of existence, you need to filter out the inherent meaning of most of the things that you're dealing with. Like, so for instance, there is in Hinduism a particular meditative practice where you can take literally anything at all. The example I've heard before is a cigarette butt that you find on the street, and draw a chalk circle around it and sit and meditate on the meaning of this thing, right? Going down as far as you possibly can. Something that we might, something that we might normally think of as not having much inherent meaning. You can delve into the depths with if you undertake that sort of meditative practice. In order for human beings to live, unfortunately, perhaps, we can't spend the entirety of our lives enraptured in wonder at the meaningfulness of everything around us.
Definitely not. I think that both authors would agree, and I think all of us in this room would agree, that it makes no sense to think that everything is super meaningful all the time. Like, I think that the very nature of sacred and profane is describing a very functional reality where, like, some things mean some deeper things, which should, mean something to, like, my deeper kind of soul reality, and other things should just matter to, like, my everyday walking about reality, where, like, I know that if this thing happens, then I can expect this other thing, and, like, it's very more calculative.
Yeah, I think we're impinging on almost a different definition of sacred and the profane that doesn't take away from either Otto or Eliade's definition,
Right.
but then talks about, okay, so let's pursue this idea. Let's say that you're ordinarily living in a world in which everything around you is full of deep and inexhaustible meaning. Let's take that as a given. But that you are not necessarily open to the understanding of that deep and inexhaustible meaning of everything around you all the time, right? Because human minds being limited as they are, you have to spend some time thinking, okay, how am I going to get dinner? Where am I going to sleep?
Yeah.
Things like that. So you have to take certain things as given, part of the background, not having this meaning that breaks through your filters. Sacred things specifically then would be those things that, as a matter of course, as a matter of your everyday walking around reality, can break through that filter and open you up to the experience of the greater meaning of everything that's around you all the time. Again, it's not somewhere you can live all the time.
No.
It's not a state that you can live in all the time if you're going to go about the biological business of living. But in order to live as human, you have to experience that every now and then. So the things that we tend to think of as sacred, temples, certain holidays, idols, or other sacred objects, those are the things that remind us
in your commute as you're
right.
Like, and I actually really do this. Like, I think about rituals as I go on my commute.
Me too.
I just go to that place. Like, it does enhance your profane existence.
There are certain trees I pass on the way to and from work that I always make a special thought of as I go. But that there needs to be things in your vicinity or in your daily life that remind you, yeah, there's more than this. There's more than just kind of the quasi-mechanical sort of biological part of your life or the workaday part of your life. Yeah. There's also something else. So maybe the things that we're calling sacred and marking out as specific things that are imbued with greater meaning are those things that have a meaning to an extent that they can break through into your sort of blinkered existence. That can remind you that everything actually has a much deeper meaning than you can. And
I almost wonder if we're, almost overstating the sacred. Like, I almost wonder if we're stating the sacred as like something on high that's like very hard to achieve. Like, I think that there's something readily available about the sacred that like you just might go unnoticed. Like that it's kind of like there are layers of meaning that you like can almost kind of like turn on and off to yourself, like whether you're ready to receive.
So it would then be a matter of the sacred is always there.
Yeah.
It's just that you're not always prepared to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it does seem like, like it's, you have a choice. Like, it seems to me like there's like a matter of choice, like whether I want to see it or not. Like, and if I'm ready to or not. Like,
right.
And yet, I mean, always there. I mean, we have to be careful because so earlier we've been talking about there being a distinction. Some places are more sacred than others, whatever, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, if we're talking about it being always there and it's just that we're not seeing it, I don't think that's quite right. I mean,
but your perception, I guess, like in seeing the fullness of it.
Well,
I guess
let's
is where I'm going with that.
let's hear the thought.
let's compare a couple places, one of which I think is more sacred than the other: Stonehenge and Carhenge. I think very few people will argue, well, no, you're just not seeing the sacred in Carhenge. Yeah, I think I am, and it's not all that sacred, right? Whereas Stonehenge, it comes right out there to you. Many of just the most, profane damn people, still they go to a place like that and like, holy cow, right?
Right.
Very few people go to Carhenge and have a moving religious experience. And the ones who do, I'm not sure if I want to know them. I'm not quite, but I mean, it's very different.
And yeah, I think that part of what we're running into is that traditional religious symbolism describing these relationships kind of leads our descriptions of them in a certain way, being, on high or elevated, as Mr. Erickson was just saying, or of being other.
Yeah.
And I don't by any means want to toss out those traditional sorts of understandings of these things, but it's important to see if there are other ways that we can define them as well.
Yeah.
And I think that, to go back to my example of the sacred, or at least the sacred defined only as meaning, right? As being something that's always available. There are certain places, there are certain things in which it's more readily available.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Not that I'm trying to say that, we should go to Carhenge and see what we can have happen to us there.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a certain way in which, even if we decide on the balance that no, the traditional modalities of talking about this, the traditional symbolisms are actually closer to the truth, I want to see if we can explore other sorts of patterns of thought.
Yep. Thank you for listening to the North Star Podcast. For more information about us, please visit axenthof.com. That's AXENTHOF.com. In our next episode, to be released on May 16th, 2026, we will have a discussion of cosmology in heathen religion. Thank you.